No one expected the shout. The studio was calm, too calm for a production of this scale. Lights stood frozen in place. Cameras were powered down. Crew members whispered quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile focus in the room. Jonathan Roumie stood at the center of the set, still wearing his costume, his head slightly bowed as he reviewed the scene one last time. Then it happened. Dallas Jenkins' voice cut through the silence, sharp, loud, unmistakable. "Jonathan!" Every sound died instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A technician's hand froze in the air. Someone near the back slowly lowered their headset. It wasn't a line from the script. This wasn't rehearsal dialogue. This was real. All eyes turned. Jonathan looked up, surprised but composed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply waited. The tension was immediate and heavy, like the air itself had thickened. People exchanged nervous glances, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Was something wrong with the scene? Had Jonathan missed a mark? Forgotten a line? Gone too far? Dallas took a step forward. "Do you realize what you just did?" he said, his voice still raised. The room felt smaller now. Even the lights seemed too bright. For a split second, fear crept in, not just for Jonathan, but for everyone watching. This was the lead actor. The director. The heart of the project. Moments like this could fracture a set. Careers had been damaged by less. Jonathan remained silent. No excuses. No defense. No explanation. That silence made everything worse. Some crew members looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared, unable to blink. Phones stayed in pockets. No one dared record. This wasn't gossip. This was something serious. Jonathan's face showed no anger. No embarrassment. Only calm. And that calm confused everyone. Because when a director raises his voice like that, it usually means something went very, very wrong. But what no one in that room understood, what no one could have predicted, was that this moment wasn't about failure at all. It was about something far more powerful. And when Dallas spoke again, everything they thought they knew was about to change forever. The day had started like many others on the set of The Chosen, long before the cameras were scheduled to roll. By sunrise, the studio was already alive. Crew members moved quietly but quickly, rolling cables across the floor, adjusting lights, checking monitors. Coffee cups sat half-finished on every flat surface. There was an unspoken understanding that this would be a demanding day. Not because of pressure from executives or deadlines, but because the scene being prepared carried weight. This wasn't just another moment in the script. Jonathan Roumie arrived early, as he always did. No entourage. No dramatic entrance. He greeted crew members by name, asked how their families were doing, and thanked the makeup team before sitting alone with his script. When he put on the costume, something about him shifted, not in a theatrical way, but in a quiet, inward one. He wasn't preparing to perform. He was preparing to listen. Across the studio, Dallas Jenkins stood near the monitors, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. He had rewritten parts of the scene the night before. Not because it wasn't working, but because it mattered too much to get wrong. The story they were telling wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to resonate. And that required precision, honesty, and trust. Tension had been building for hours. The crew could feel it, not as stress, but as focus. Conversations were shorter. Movements more intentional. Everyone knew that scenes like this were rare. The kind that didn't just advance a story, but carried emotional consequences for everyone involved. Jonathan rehearsed quietly, speaking lines under his breath. Sometimes he paused, closed his eyes, and took a slow breath. Other times he adjusted a single word in the margin of his script, not changing the dialogue, but clarifying the intention behind it. Dallas noticed everything. He had worked with Jonathan long enough to recognize when something deeper was happening. This wasn't routine preparation. This was immersion. And while part of him respected it, another part of him felt the pressure rising. When an actor goes that deep, the responsibility on the director becomes heavier. One wrong interruption, one careless note, could break something fragile. The first rehearsal began without cameras. Jonathan stepped into position. The other actors followed. The room quieted, not because someone asked for silence, but because everyone instinctively stopped talking. When Jonathan spoke his first line, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived in, like the words had existed long before the script. The scene unfolded slowly. Too slowly, perhaps. Dallas watched the monitors, his jaw tightening. Something was happening, but he couldn't yet name it. The pacing wasn't what he expected. The energy was different. Jonathan wasn't projecting. He wasn't emphasizing the emotional beats the way they had discussed. Instead, he was restraining everything. The scene ended. Silence followed. Some crew members nodded, unsure how to react. Others avoided eye contact. The assistant director glanced toward Dallas, waiting for instructions. Dallas didn't speak right away. He stood there, replaying the scene in his mind. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. The pauses were too long. The delivery too subtle. But something about it lingered. It refused to be dismissed. "Let's run it again," Dallas finally said. Jonathan nodded. They reset. This time, the room felt heavier. Jonathan's voice was softer. His movements slower. He didn't look like an actor hitting marks. He looked like someone present in a moment that mattered. A few crew members felt chills. One lighting technician wiped his eyes without realizing it. The scene ended again. Dallas exhaled sharply. This wasn't what he had planned. This wasn't what he had envisioned. And yet, he couldn't look away. Inside, Dallas felt two forces colliding. The director in him wanted control, structure, clarity, intention. But something else, something rarer, was happening right in front of him. Jonathan wasn't performing for the camera. He was inviting the room into something honest. And that scared Dallas. Because moments like this don't come often. And when they do, they demand a response. Dallas took a step forward. That's when the room sensed it. Something was about to happen. And no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what Dallas was about to say next. Dallas Jenkins stood frozen for a moment, staring at the monitors as if they might speak back to him. The room waited. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the low hum of equipment felt louder than it should have. This was the pause everyone on a film set recognizes, the one that comes just before direction, correction, or explosion. Jonathan Roumie remained in place, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing steady. He didn't look toward Dallas. He didn't look toward the crew. He stayed exactly where the scene had left him, as if stepping out too quickly might shatter whatever had just passed through the room. Dallas finally turned. "Cut," he said. The word echoed harder than usual. Jonathan lifted his eyes. Dallas took a step forward. Then another. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, but his jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. The assistant director instinctively leaned back. Someone near the sound booth reached to lower a mic, then stopped midway, unsure if they should. Dallas stopped a few feet from Jonathan. "Jonathan!" His voice wasn't shouting yet, but it was louder than normal. Sharper. The kind of tone that made everyone straighten their backs. "Yes," Jonathan replied calmly. Dallas exhaled through his nose. What was that? The question wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It carried weight and accusation. Jonathan didn't answer right away. "I mean," Dallas continued, his voice rising slightly, "do you realize how different that was from what we discussed?" A ripple of unease moved through the crew. Jonathan nodded once. "Yes." That single word landed heavily. Dallas laughed. Once. Not amused. Not kind. "Then explain it to me," he said. "Because that wasn't the pacing. That wasn't the emphasis. And that definitely wasn't what we rehearsed." The tension thickened. Jonathan opened his mouth, then closed it again. He took a breath. "I felt the scene needed space," he said quietly. "Less explanation. More presence." Dallas' eyes narrowed. "Presence," he repeated. "Jonathan, this isn't theater. This is television. We have beats. We have timing. We have an audience that needs clarity." Jonathan met his gaze. Calm. Unshaken. Sometimes clarity comes from stillness, he said. The room froze. Dallas' patience snapped. Stillness, he raised his voice now. You slowed the entire scene to a crawl. You cut emotional cues. You pulled energy away from everyone else in the room. A few actors shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan didn't flinch. I wasn't trying to pull anything, he said evenly. I was trying to listen. That was when Dallas lost it. Listen, he shouted. This is a set, not a meditation retreat. The sound hit the walls and came back louder. Every head snapped up. Someone near the back sucked in a sharp breath. The boom operator's arms trembled slightly from holding position too long. Jonathan stood still. Dallas kept going. You can't just decide to reinvent a scene because it feels meaningful to you, he said, his voice cutting. This is bigger than one performance. Bigger than one interpretation. Jonathan's voice remained steady. I know. That response, calm, grounded, unbothered, only fueled the fire. Then why did it feel like you were doing this for yourself? Dallas demanded. That question hung in the air. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was softer than before, but stronger. I wasn't doing it for myself, he said. I was doing it for the truth of the moment. Silence exploded through the room. Dallas stared at him. For a long second, no one spoke. The crew waited for the fallout, for anger, for dismissal, for someone to be sent off set. Dallas' hands clenched into fists. You don't get to decide that alone, he said finally, his voice low but dangerous. Not here. Jonathan nodded. You're right. That answer disarmed everyone. Dallas blinked. I should have communicated better, Jonathan continued. But something happened in that scene. And I didn't want to force it into something smaller just because it was unfamiliar. Dallas turned away abruptly, pacing now. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, running a hand through his hair. Unfamiliar can be risky. And risk affects everyone. Jonathan stayed silent. The room waited. Dallas stopped pacing and turned back sharply. Do you have any idea, he said loudly, what you just did to this set? That was the moment. The moment from part one. The one that froze the studio. Jonathan looked up, eyes calm, heart steady. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Dallas Jenkins fell silent. Because something about Jonathan's stillness. His refusal to defend himself. His refusal to react. Forced Dallas to confront a terrifying possibility. That maybe, just maybe, what he was witnessing wasn't a mistake at all. And when Dallas spoke again, everything was about to change. The silence that followed Dallas Jenkins' last words was unlike anything the studio had felt before. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense in the usual way. It was heavy. Dallas stood there, staring at Jonathan Roumie, as if waiting for resistance, an argument, a justification, anything that would let him stay in control of the moment. But Jonathan gave him nothing. No defensiveness. No frustration. Just quiet presence. Jonathan lowered his gaze slightly, not in submission, but in patience. His hands rested calmly at his sides. His breathing was slow, measured. He looked like someone who understood that not every moment required a response. That unsettled people. Crew members shifted their weight. Someone near the lighting rig cleared their throat, then immediately regretted it. The assistant director glanced at Dallas, then at Jonathan, unsure whose cue to follow. Jonathan finally spoke, but not to defend himself. I'm here, he said softly. Whatever you need. The words landed gently, but their impact rippled through the room. Dallas blinked. He hadn't expected that. He had expected an explanation. A creative debate. Even an apology. But not surrender, not in weakness, but in trust. For the first time since the confrontation began, Dallas felt the anger drain from his chest, replaced by confusion. Jonathan wasn't fighting him. He wasn't challenging authority. He wasn't protecting ego. He was offering the moment back. Dallas turned away slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. He walked toward the monitors, staring at the frozen frame from the last take. Jonathan stood on screen, still and quiet, eyes full of something difficult to name. The crew watched Dallas now. Every director has moments of doubt, but they rarely show them, especially in front of a full set. Authority depends on certainty. And yet, here Dallas was, staring at a screen, unsure. "Run the playback," he said quietly. A technician obeyed instantly. The scene began again. At first, people watched cautiously, bracing themselves to confirm what Dallas had already criticized. The pacing. The stillness. The absence of traditional emotional cues. But something strange happened. As the seconds passed, the room leaned in. Jonathan's pauses no longer felt slow. They felt intentional. His silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. The restraint drew attention instead of pushing it away. A few crew members exchanged looks. Dallas crossed his arms, jaw tight, eyes locked on the screen. The scene ended. No one spoke. Then someone in the back whispered, barely audible, "That hit different." Dallas didn't respond. He replayed it again. And again. Each time, the same thing happened. The initial discomfort faded, replaced by a quiet pull, an emotional gravity that couldn't be explained by technique alone. Dallas felt it now. What Jonathan had done wasn't rebellion. It wasn't ego. It was risk. And not the careless kind, but the kind rooted in trust. Trust that the audience could feel without being told. Trust that silence could speak louder than dialogue. Dallas exhaled slowly. He turned back toward Jonathan. Jonathan met his eyes, calm as ever. No expectation. No triumph. Just openness. "I didn't mean to derail anything," Jonathan said gently. "If it doesn't serve the story, we change it." That humility hit harder than any argument could have. Dallas felt something shift inside him, something uncomfortable, but necessary. The set no longer felt divided. It felt united by uncertainty, by the realization that something rare had just passed through the room. Dallas nodded once. "Let's take 5, he said. Relief washed over the crew. People moved again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Someone laughed nervously. The tension loosened, but it didn't disappear. It transformed. Jonathan stepped away quietly, heading toward a corner of the set. A few crew members watched him go, their expressions thoughtful. No one rushed to him. No one congratulated him. And that felt right. Dallas remained by the monitors, staring at the paused image on the screen. He realized then that the moment hadn't frozen the studio because of anger. It froze because everyone sensed it. They had witnessed something unscripted. Something honest. Something that couldn't be forced or repeated. And now, Dallas Jenkins had a choice. To protect control. Or to protect truth. And whatever decision he made next would define not just the scene, but the soul of the story they were telling. When the break ended, no one returned to the set the same way they had left it. There was a different energy now, quieter, more deliberate. Crew members moved with care, as if afraid to disturb something fragile that had settled over the studio. Conversations were fewer. Smiles were softer. Everyone sensed that the next few minutes mattered more than anything scheduled on the call sheet. Dallas Jenkins was still standing by the monitors when the room reset. He hadn't moved much during the break. He hadn't checked his phone. He hadn't spoken to producers or assistants. Instead, he had replayed the scene again and again in his mind, not just what appeared on screen, but what he had felt while watching it. That feeling refused to leave. Jonathan Roumie returned quietly to his mark. No performance mask. No visible nerves. He looked exactly the same as before, calm, grounded, present. Yet now, the room looked at him differently. Dallas finally turned to face the set. "Everyone," he said, his voice steady but subdued, "before we roll again, I need to say something." Every head lifted. This wasn't routine. Directors didn't pause a production like this unless something significant was about to happen. Dallas took a breath. "What we just witnessed," he said slowly, "wasn't a mistake." A murmur rippled through the crew. Dallas continued. "I reacted because I was scared." The word landed heavily. "I was scared of losing control of the scene," he admitted. "Scared of deviating from what I thought it was supposed to be." He glanced toward Jonathan. "But sometimes," Dallas said, "the story asks more of us than control." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was attentive. Dallas stepped closer to Jonathan, stopping just short of his mark. "Jonathan didn't ignore direction," he said. "He listened, to the moment, to the weight of it, to something deeper than blocking and timing." Jonathan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with the attention. "What he did," Dallas continued, "is rare. And I almost shut it down because it didn't look like what I expected." Dallas turned back to the crew. "If you felt something watching that playback," he said, "you weren't imagining it." Several crew members nodded instinctively. One producer near the monitors swallowed hard. Dallas' voice softened. "That scene wasn't asking us to be impressive. It was asking us to be honest." He paused. "And honesty doesn't always raise its voice." The words hung in the air. Jonathan finally looked up. Dallas met his gaze. "I shouldn't have shouted," Dallas said plainly. "That's on me." Jonathan shook his head slightly. "You're protecting the story," he said. "I respect that." Dallas smiled faintly. "And you trusted it." He turned back to the monitors. "We're not going to fix that scene," Dallas said. "We're going to protect it." A wave of quiet realization moved through the room. "This," Dallas added, tapping the screen, "is why we're doing this show in the first place." For the first time all day, someone clapped. Then another. Then another. The applause spread, not loud, not theatrical, but sincere. The kind that comes from recognition rather than celebration. Jonathan looked overwhelmed. He didn't bow. He didn't smile broadly. He simply placed a hand over his heart and nodded once, as if to say thank you for seeing it. Dallas raised a hand gently, quieting the room. "Let's roll again," he said. Same approach. Same stillness. The cameras powered up. Lights adjusted. Action. Jonathan stepped into the scene, not performing now, but allowing. The words flowed naturally. The pauses breathed. The silence spoke. This time, no one doubted it. When the scene ended, no one rushed to speak. They didn't need to. Everyone in that studio understood they had just captured something that couldn't be manufactured, something fragile and true. Dallas looked around the room, his voice low but certain. "That," he said, "is the moment people will remember." And in that instant, the confrontation that had frozen the studio earlier no longer felt like conflict. It felt like revelation. Because sometimes the loudest lessons arrive through silence. And sometimes, the moment that almost breaks a room is the same moment that brings it together. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, no one rushed to move. That alone said everything. Usually, the end of a take signaled motion, crew resetting lights, assistants calling out adjustments, actors stepping out of character. But this time, the studio stayed still, as if everyone feared that speaking too soon might break whatever had just been captured. Dallas Jenkins lowered his head slightly, hands resting on his hips. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was absorbing. "That's a wrap on the scene," he said quietly. Only then did the room begin to breathe again. People moved softly now, almost reverently. A few crew members wiped their eyes without comment. Others exchanged looks that needed no explanation. Something meaningful had passed through the set, and everyone knew it. Jonathan Roumie stepped out of position and removed part of his costume, folding it carefully instead of handing it off. He thanked the nearby crew members, as he always did, but this time their responses were different. More deliberate. More grateful. "Thank you," one of them said back, voice low. Jonathan nodded, humbled. Dallas walked toward him, no longer as a director confronting an actor, but as a collaborator approaching a fellow storyteller. "I want you to know something," Dallas said. Jonathan turned to him, attentive. "When I raised my voice earlier," Dallas continued, "it wasn't about anger. It was fear. Fear of letting go." Jonathan listened without interrupting. "I built this show with a vision," Dallas said. "And sometimes, holding on to that vision too tightly can stop it from growing." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Growth usually feels uncomfortable," he said. Dallas chuckled softly. "That it does." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the set buzzing quietly around them. "You trusted the story today," Dallas said. "Even when I didn't." Jonathan shook his head. "I trusted you to protect it," he replied. "And you did." That mutual respect settled something unseen between them. Nearby, a young production assistant watched the exchange, eyes wide. Later, she would tell people that this was the moment she understood what leadership really looked like. Not control, not authority, but humility in real time. As the day wound down, word of the moment spread quietly through the crew. Not as gossip, not as drama, but as something worth remembering. "This is why this show feels different," someone whispered near the equipment carts. "No ego," another replied. "Just truth." Dallas gathered the team briefly before dismissal. "I know today was intense," he said. "But what happened here matters. We don't chase perfection, we protect honesty. And that requires trust." Heads nodded around the room. Jonathan stood near the back, hands folded, listening. He didn't step forward. He didn't take credit. And that, too, was noticed. When the crew finally dispersed, the studio felt lighter, but fuller. Jonathan lingered for a moment alone on set, looking at the space where the scene had unfolded. He closed his eyes briefly, breathed out, and whispered a quiet thank you, whether to the story, the moment, or something deeper, no one could say. Dallas watched from a distance. He realized then that leadership wasn't about always being right. It was about recognizing when someone else was. Later that evening, as lights shut down and the studio emptied, Dallas made a note in his journal, a habit he rarely shared with anyone. "Today reminded me why this story matters. When we stop performing and start listening, something holy happens." The confrontation that had once threatened to fracture the room had instead strengthened it. Not because voices were raised, but because egos were lowered. And that lesson didn't end with the scene. It stayed with the crew. It followed them into future shoots. It became part of the culture of the set. A reminder that the most powerful moments aren't forced. They're allowed. And sometimes, the greatest resolution isn't applause or praise. It's quiet understanding. Long after the studio lights were turned off, the lesson of that day remained. Not as a dramatic story retold with exaggeration. Not as a moment of conflict turned into legend. But as a quiet truth that stayed with everyone who witnessed it. Because what froze that studio wasn't shouting. It was humility. In an industry built on performance, control, and visibility, something rare had happened. Two people, both leaders in their own way, had chosen listening over winning. One had been willing to risk misunderstanding. The other had been willing to admit fear. And in that space between them, something honest was born. Most people think power looks loud. That leadership demands certainty. That authority means never hesitating, never apologizing, never stepping back. But that day proved the opposite. True leadership is the courage to pause. To say, "I might be wrong." To recognize truth even when it arrives in an unexpected form. Dallas Jenkins didn't lose authority when he admitted fear. He gained trust. Jonathan Roumie didn't gain respect by defending himself. He earned it by staying grounded. And the room, the crew, the set, the story itself, became stronger because of it. That is the kind of moment audiences never see. They only feel the result. They feel it when a scene lingers longer than expected. When silence speaks louder than dialogue. When something unseen reaches them and they don't know why. Those moments don't come from perfection. They come from presence. From people willing to put ego aside and serve something greater than themselves. The world outside that studio isn't so different. We all face moments where our instincts tell us to defend, to dominate, to prove ourselves right. We all stand at crossroads where listening feels risky and control feels safer. But the strongest people don't rush to be heard. They stay open. They trust. They understand that respect is not demanded, it's demonstrated. That day on set became a quiet standard. Not written in any rulebook. Not announced in any meeting. But felt. A reminder that the best work, whether in art, leadership, or life, comes from humility paired with courage. From knowing when to speak. And knowing when to stay silent. Because sometimes, The moment that almost breaks everything is the moment that reveals what truly matters. And sometimes the loudest lesson is taught without raising your voice at all. If this story reminded you that humility is strength, that listening is power, and that respect begins before recognition, type respect in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Because stories like this don't belong to one set, one show, or one moment. They belong to everyone who believes that true leadership is quiet, true power is steady, and true impact is lasting.